Hello and welcome to Legal Thinking from RWK Goodman. I'm joined by Ed Wootton.
Hello.
And I'm Liam Baird.
There you are.
In light of recent events, semi-recent events, which was the collapse of FTX, which was a crypto exchange, in this episode we've decided to speak to Dan Dodman, who is a dispute resolution litigator.
Yep, that's right. And we basically I asked him to give us a little lowdown about what he does in specifically in civil fraud, which is just one area of his work, which is impacted by crypto. And also just to give us the inside track on, how crypto fraud might work and how people can take action to get their money back if they've been defrauded.
Without any further ado, let's roll tape.
Indeed. So yeah, Dan, thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the podcast. I guess my first thing is if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do in the area of civil fraud, just briefly.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a partner in our litigation team, and as you say, one of my sort of specialty areas is civil fraud, and that's quite a broad remit. So we tend to help clients when they think or have been subject to an element of fraud. So that covers both elements of it. So both identifying whether a fraud has happened. Mm-hmm. So the investigatory aspects of going into a business and looking at various pieces of evidence and trying to establish exactly what's happened, which is obviously a pretty crucial part of the process.
Yeah.
And then once we have worked out what's happened, effectively bringing proceedings to recover funds. And that goes the whole way from starting legal proceedings against a party to tracing assets to looking at different jurisdictions if money's been moved to different places, and also looking at the ways that money's been moved, so crypto and various other different things, which I think is what we're going to be talking about.
So crypto, I mean, is obviously in the last few years become a growing kind of passion for quite a lot of people. I just wonder, obviously, we hear a lot about crypto fraud and that kind of thing. Is it a particularly rife area for fraud? What kind of frauds kind of occur in the crypto space that you've probably seen?
Yeah, so what you see often with crypto is that it's often a vehicle for what I would describe as traditional fraud. So although it's all very new and interesting and exciting, some of the underlying things that happen are actually very old, or certainly been around for a long time. And what you're seeing is the crypto either being used as a vehicle to commit those frauds, or it's being used in a way that entices people to fall for those frauds in the first place. So what I mean by that is either the assets are sort of dispersed using crypto, or alternatively people sign up for things like investment frauds, for example.
Right.
Because crypto is new and exciting, and there's lots of messaging out there about how much money certain people have made. But at its heart, you're still looking at the same sort of investment frauds that you've had really for, potentially hundreds of years, things like Ponzi schemes and, all the rest of it.
So is it that newness that is the reason why potentially crypto fraud is just so much fraud occurs in the crypto space, just because it's so relatively new? People don't understand it. They don't know when they're basically being sold something that isn't real or that kind of thing. Is that what you see a lot?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. I think I think it's partly that. I think it's also partly that there's been so much coverage about such high returns given to people, legitimately through sort of crypto investment. Yep. So it makes the sort of standard investment frauds look more feasible and more realistic. So it's one of these things where, if someone says, I'm going to give you sort of 200-300% return.
Yeah, you're going to try for it.
And there's often a lot of question marks raised. But in circumstances where, actually there's lots of media coverage about people who have had, 200, 300%, 2,000%, 3,000% returns off crypto. Suddenly those kind of numbers don't look so ridiculous, and people go, well, actually, I wouldn't mind signing up and having a go at this.
Yeah, so it's not the technology in of itself. It's just the people using the hype around the technology to basically take advantage, I guess. Yeah. By the sounds of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also a lack of understanding just generally across the board from lots of people about how crypto works or what it means.
Yeah.
And I often think when you are looking at things that people don't understand, there's obviously it's much harder for people to make an assessment about whether what they're being told is potentially fraudulent or, completely unrealistic or, something that wouldn't possibly happen. There becomes an element of trust because you're relying on someone else to tell you what the situation is. And that is an area where fraudsters can, really make a lot of waves potentially.
Yeah. So when a fraud actually occurs in the crypto space, and in your experience, what kind of stage are people at when they usually kind of come to you and when they've experienced crypto fraud? Are they, what is it that's tipped them over the edge to realizing, it's all gone? Or because there's certain instances where I've read about, people put all this money in and then people like just the crypto fund just completely disappears or something like that. Is that a common kind of trend, or are there different kind of circumstances that occur that bring people to lawyers such as yourself? Yeah,
no, that's pretty bang on right. I mean, what you find normally is that fraudsters will take advantage of individuals, and they will keep on taking advantage for as long as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
So, they will push, they will ask for more investments. They will say, the investments come in certain circumstances, what you find is that, you may get some element of return back. So people get a little bit of money back and they go, that's great. I'll put some more money in. But there will always come a point where the fraudsters realize that, someone's getting suspicious, or that there's no more facility to get anything else out of those individuals. And at that point, they will disappear off. Or, there are certain circumstances and certain clients that I've had where, for example, the police have been involved or the FCA have been involved.
Right.
And that sort of flags people up at an early stage.
So they get contacted by the FCA saying you may have been involved in this, or how's that? Okay.
Yeah, or there's press releases. I mean, the FCA is a difficult area because a lot of these cryptocurrencies aren't regulated by the FCA, or they won't be regulated by the FCA. So that also provides less protection. But that doesn't mean that the FCA don't sort of keep an eye on certain organisations that are doing sort of brokerage work or might be selling other types of products associated with crypto. But the cryptocurrencies themselves generally aren't regulated.
And on that point, the lack of regulation in the space, does it make it more difficult for you to recover funds when this is a completely unregulated space? And because you say that the frauds are the classic type, but does the nature of crypto fraud make it more difficult to recover funds because it's unregulated or anything like that?
Yeah, yes, it can do. Yeah. So, one of the traditional ways that you would seek to recover funds for, an individual, depending on the values that we're talking about here, is through the financial ombudsman. Mm-hmm. And that option isn't available where there's no regulation in the way that we just talked about. So that cuts off a major avenue of potential redress and potential complaint.
Right.
That's balanced, I think, by the fact that the English courts have been very proactive at a fairly early stage about dealing with crypto, and have sort of got their head around the crypto environment, and to the extent that it's now possible to freeze crypto assets, trace crypto assets in the way that you would deal with a traditional fraud if someone had moved money from one location to another location, or had bought property or a car. The English courts have taken a pretty proactive view about that, and about the actual process of freezing crypto assets, and that's quite a well-worn path now. So from that perspective, it's quite it's quite positive news. The difficulty comes that, freezing injunctions and tracing of assets is an expensive process. It's a process that costs quite considerable amounts of money. So really, it's only appropriate where the fraud is quite, large scale, really.
Okay. You're talking about the tracing of funds and seeing things moving about. Does the blockchain technology make it easier for that tracing? Because obviously, with blockchain technology, the idea is you get this full log of where money has been moved and all that kind of thing. Does that have any bearing on tracing money?
It does, yeah, it does, and it can actually make it a little bit easier to find where the money has gone. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be taken out of the system or spent on something somewhere. It doesn't normally just sort of exist as crypto forever. But the actual process of tracing and finding out where assets are can actually be slightly easier. But what you traditionally find is it's also probably slightly easier for those assets to disappear into different jurisdictions, which are particularly hard to enforce against or to go against.
Okay.
But that's a challenge.
Yeah. So if someone is listening to this and they think, okay, I've been the victim of a crypto fraud, what is the first step in taking legal action?
Well, I think the first step before that is to make the assessment that you might well be subject to one of these things.
Okay.
And to sort of cut contact with the potential fraudster, or at the very least, not keep providing assets. One of the things that I do see, and it's very easy, when we're sort of cold light of day to say that this is, people ought to be more aware of this, but these are all quite complicated, quite sophisticated social engineering exercises. And there's a huge amounts of pressure to put more money in, to invest more, to do this. And if people are putting, you under pressure or time limited pressure, or saying, if you don't invest this extra amount in crypto by this particular time, then you're going to lose all the rest of the money that you've already put in. Anything like that should be flagging alert.
Real red flag.
Yeah. Red flags pretty early. Because a lot of these frauds rely on you not taking a step back and looking at things. I think the second thing often is the use of crypto should also just by itself sometimes form a red flag. So what we see is sort of push payment frauds. So people intercepting emails and asking for money or diverting money from one place to another. So you think you're paying one person, but actually you're paying a fraudster. But also quite often, and this is increasingly often, situations where people are being called saying that your bank's been compromised. We need you to transfer money over here, or we need you to put the money into crypto. Anything like that should be a real red flag. So the first step is to try and identify these things, as early as you possibly can, and then stop interacting with the fraudsters. I think then, it really is a case of sort of picking up the phone and trying to get legal advice from anyone, who has some sort of specialty in the civil fraud area, or particularly has some crypto experience. And they should then be able to talk you through that process, fairly quickly. I've seen so many of these types of fraud, and it is really, really easy to stick your head in the sand and hope that it's not you that's been defrauded. But the quicker that you can sort of identify that and potentially analyze it, the better.
Okay, great. Some really practical advice there, as well as some really interesting information. So thanks very much for your time, Dan.
My pleasure.
Thank you to Dan Dodman for joining us on this episode of Legal Thinking.
Yeah, it was, as you could tell, there's a lot of nuance to crypto. I was specifically interested about the flip side of the deregulation, meaning that it's hard to get the money back because there's no official process in place. But because of the technology being on blockchain, sometimes it's actually easy to trace where it goes. So that was really interesting. If you want to find out more about common crypto scams and what to do if you've been defrauded, there is actually a blog post on our website. Can you believe it, Liam?
I'm beside myself.
I know, it's amazing. It's by Moses Akanmu. He has written basically all about how people commonly get scammed, what the common red flags are, as we discussed today, and what you should do if you've been scammed. So basically just more detail about what we've discussed today. So yeah, take a look. I've put the link in the show notes, and yeah, take a look.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Legal Thinking, do rate it 5 stars in your podcast provider of choice. That really helps other people find us. What else do we say? I've forgotten.
Yeah, like and subscribe, everyone. Just do all the things that give us more algorithmic clout, basically.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Goodbye.